Hello, Brad here again. Today we are on Lesson 5, Chapter 5, Validating and Debugging Our Code. What we're going to learn in this lesson is how to validate our HTML and CSS code. We're going to learn how to use developer tools to debug HTML and CSS. And we're also going to learn how to use the JavaScript console to debug JavaScript. No matter what skill level you are as a developer, you're going to encounter bugs in your code or errors. I wouldn't worry about that too much because it happens all the time. What you should worry about is how to fix them and how to find them and what to do in these situations, which is why this lesson is so important. In this lesson, we're going to go over how to validate HTML and CSS as we are developing it. And we're also going to talk about some really cool tools that are built into our browser with how to identify and debug issues with JavaScript. In the beginning of Chapter 5, they talk about this W3C markup validation service, which enables you to validate an HTML document to ensure that it has been coded accurately. This is useful. So you can type in any set of code and it will give you a message on whether it's valid or not. The developer tools in your browser, such as Chrome's developer tools, are really useful. And it's good to use not just looking at your own code, but other people's code as well. You can right-click and click Inspect on any element on the page. For example, if you're looking at someone else's website and you're curious as to how they did that, you can right-click and click Inspect and you can look at their code. But if you're looking at your page and you opened one of your examples or you opened a HTML document up, you can find the area where you want to review the code, right-click, click Inspect. It will show you the exact HTML used to render that element, as well as the style rules that are currently applied to that element. So if you click over a heading, it will show you the HTML code for that heading, as well as what style is being applied to that heading. If you then go back to your browser where it's being rendered and right-click on a paragraph and click Inspect, it will show you the HTML code for that paragraph, as well as any style rules that are applied to that paragraph. So it's really useful to see what your code is doing and where and how and why it's displaying the way it is. But other than just looking at your code, you can actually see what is wrong with it. So for example, if you're supposed to have a list that has 3 elements and it's supposed to be blue and it's not showing up blue, you can find out why by using the developer tools. Or if you're supposed to have a space somewhere, the developer tools can show you why that is or is not happening. A lot of times it's really simple. It's something as like forgetting to put a closing list element tag, or forgetting to put a closing tag somewhere, or getting the syntax wrong in your style section. For example, if you're styling something and you forgot to assign a class, then that style won't be applied at all. Or if you linked your CSS file wrong, then no styles will be applied to your page and you'd be able to see that. But say you see that there is style and it is linked properly, but that style isn't being applied to that specific element on HTML, you could see that maybe you didn't assign the class correctly, or maybe you typed the word wrong or forgot your semicolon. Simple little things could throw off your whole page of code. So that's why this is extremely important, that if you wrote some HTML code in CSS and you go to view it in the browser and it's not displaying at all like you thought it would, but you don't really know what's wrong just by looking at your code, this can pinpoint to you in the exact area where the issue is. And usually the first point something is wrong, that's where you want to start, because chances are something further down the page, it might not be an issue once you fix the first thing. So you always work from top bottom, when you're using these developer tools. Fix the first error you see first, because chances are, once you fix that, everything else could be fixed on the page, or you may see your next error. So work from top down. When you're using the developer tools and you're trying to test or check out some HTML and CSS, you want to right-click and click Inspect Element. From there, it'll show you a tab that'll be defaulted to Elements. If you look up top, there are other tabs that says Network, Source, Timeline, etc. But up there, when you're looking at elements, these are the HTML elements on the page. You can click the arrow to expand any section. If you notice, sometimes tags like paragraph tags or headings or lists or tables, we'll talk about tables in a few more lessons, but they'll be collapsed altogether. So you want to click to make the arrow a little down arrow, and it will show you everything inside that code. Also notice to the right, there's a little style section. So all your HTML elements will be on the left under elements, and on the right, it will show you the associated style with whatever line of code that's highlighted. I also want to note that when using the developer tools, you can directly make changes right there within the developer tools and see what it will look like. But if you are debugging and trying to see what's wrong, typically you would want to go back and fix your code, save it, but make sure you reload the page after you save it so you can see if your changes took place or fixed it. It is recommended in your book to always run your code through the validator first before going through the developer tools. Running it through the validator will check purely for syntax errors. In your book, it goes through how to use the developer tools to find an error in HTML code. It also does this with finding errors in CSS code. You can do this the same pretty much with your developer tools, inspecting the element, looking at the element, and looking at the style. Something that's important to make note of is that you could run your HTML and CSS through a validator, and there could potentially be no syntax errors at all. But your page is not displaying how you want it to display. For example, buttons can be different sizes, or lists can be spaced, not proportionate to one another, or not in the right spot on the page. Technically, if you want all the words in a list to be red, and they're not, there's nothing wrong with the syntax of the code, so the validator wouldn't pick that up. And that's one of the potential issues you got to look out when you're using these tools to debug your code, is that with CSS, since you're styling your page, you could be syntactically correct in your code, but it's still wrong because it's not displaying how you want it to display. So using the developer tools can help you pinpoint to that exact area and see what is going on and why is it not displaying a certain way. If you have 3 buttons and one of those buttons is a lot bigger than all the other buttons, you can use the developer tools to look into that and try to see why that's happening. Debugging JavaScript through your browser's developer tools is probably the most common way to, and one of the only ways to debug JavaScript like this. It enables you to step through a function line by line and see what's happening, and actually stop and start at certain points, which we'll talk about in a second. In your book, it gives you an example of some JavaScript code, and it's just a button that says click me. So you're supposed to be able to click the button and the count should increment. So if you click the button 4 times, it should say 4. It's going to show you how to use your developer tools. But now that we're in JavaScript, instead of looking at elements and style, we're going to be looking at console. Everything's going to be in the console. In this console, when something's not working right, it could show you some error messages, which can be very helpful. Also, taking a closer look at the sources panel, it contains a set of tools that enable you to start, pause, resume, and step through code that's loaded in the web browsers. You can set breakpoints. You can watch individual sections of your code execute, which is very helpful. So breakpoints, setting breakpoints, is really, it enables you to specify exactly where you would like to stop the JavaScript from executing. So if you set a breakpoint at a certain function, when you run that function or when the code hits that function, for example, you click a button, it calls a function. Well, if you set a breakpoint on that function, when you click the button, your code would stop right there at that breakpoint. From there, you have some options. You can step over, step into, or step out. Now this is talking about what you want your code to do at that breakpoint at that line. So in your book, you can follow that example on how to use breakpoints when you're debugging JavaScript. It tells you exactly where to set a breakpoint and how to step through that function. If you do anything in Lesson 5, Chapter 5, this would be what I think you should do, and it's probably the most important example. Using the developer tools to debug your code with JavaScript is very important. I use it, and I've been doing it for years and years. Anytime I've had a developer job where I was using JavaScript, chances are things can go wrong or not work. And this is the way you can kind of check and see what's going on and figure it out and find out what you need to do to fix it. It's extremely important as a developer that we're able to do this and debug our code. Stay tuned for Lesson 5's PowerPoint presentation coming up next.